The aliens mock humanity's silence, assuming Earth is a forgotten relic. But the galaxy is about to witness an ancient power awakening, and Earth's response is not what they expect. The first signs of a returning human force unfold, crushing the aliens' underestimation with overwhelming clarity. The Galactic Council was brimming with arrogant laughter as they watched the Earth's empty signal, the silent planet of the long-lost humans. How the mighty had fallen, or so they thought. Is this it? Krylos, the lead strategist of the Arvox, sneered, tapping his metallic claws against the surface of the holographic table. This is what we feared. A dormant species clinging to the fringes of the galaxy, forgotten in time. No fleet, no threat. The council chamber hummed with the echoes of the Arvox mockery, their bared teeth, elongated jaws, and cruel reptilian eyes gleamed in the flickering glow of the pale blue planet projected before them, a planet now on the verge of irrelevance. Its inhabitants, extinct surely, a blip in the history of the stars. Primitive, aren't they? Vekor, a member from the Luan, snorted. He flicked a dismissive hand, and the projection shifted to a map of the galaxy, Earth sitting like a dead weight on the farthest corner. Why did we ever waste time worrying about them? Their words hung in the air like a poison cloud, humanity's ancient fleets. The legends that said Earth could bring the stars to their knees, just stories, foolish myths from a bygone era. But as their laughter rippled through the council chamber, no one noticed the faint tremor in the table beneath them. No one noticed the quiet hum that began to rise, low at first, then louder, like the deep rumbling of a storm just beyond the horizon. The Arvok turned, noticing the shift in the atmosphere only too late. Is that? Vekor's voice trailed off. His eyes widened, and a flicker of doubt passed through his hardened exterior. The hologram blinked, shifting from Earth's empty void to something far more sinister. A massive object appeared from the dark depths of the galaxy, cutting through the silence like a knife through air. No noise, no warning, just an imposing shadow cloaked in darkness, the space around it distorted as if reality itself was being bent. Krylos' confident smile faltered. "What is this?" he growled. No one had expected this. No one had thought to question the silence. And then a voice. It didn't come from the holographic display, nor from any communication channels, but from the very core of their minds, like an imprint carved into their thoughts. "You should have left us to rest," the voice said, with the weight of millennia. "But now you will face us." Krylos' grip on the table tightened as the air around him chilled. The voice was calm, almost serene, but it was laced with an unmistakable finality. The Arvok's laughter died on their lips. "We thought they were extinct," Vekor whispered. "A flash of light, an explosion, not in space, but in the very fabric of reality. The faintest trace of energy, like a spark from a distant supernova, exploded outward, overwhelming their senses. The galaxy trembled under the weight of an ancient power no one had expected. The council's leader, Krylos, stiffened, his mind racing. "Activate the defense protocols," he shouted, scrambling to recalibrate the ships under his command. But it was too late. The moment the command reached the fleet, it was as if the galaxy itself had taken a collective breath and held it in horror. An enormous rift opened in space, just beyond Earth's orbit. And from that rift, ancient ships, vast beyond imagination, began to emerge, not new, not improved, but perfected in time. They were the legacy of a civilization that had once stood at the peak of galactic power, and now humanity's ancient fleet had returned. The galaxy held its breath. Silence. And then, the voice again. "We are the ones who shaped the stars, and we have returned to reclaim what is ours." The council's arrogance was shattered, the tremor beneath the table, the hum in the air. They were all too real, and they realized with a sinking certainty that this was no forgotten relic. This was humanity, and it was coming back to make its mark on the galaxy. Kryx's voice cracked as he muttered, "And that was before Earth even responded." They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The stars blinked, not all of them, but enough of them. In the quiet expanse of the galaxy, a momentary flicker in the void seemed almost insignificant, like the brush of a finger across an ancient canvas. But that flicker was enough to break the fragile silence the Arvok had so confidently surrounded themselves with. The massive vessels, far beyond anything the Arvok had seen, continued to emerge from the rift in space. The light from the distant stars bent around their enormous forms, distorting their sheer scale. These were no new ships, no modern marvels of war. These were relics, older than anything the Council had ever encountered. Their hulls gleamed with a dark metallic sheen, marked by the passage of time, yet undeniably strong. In the command center of the Council fleet, the shock had set in. The alien species, once so certain of their superiority, now felt the sting of fear. The unknown power that had emerged from the dark folds of the galaxy wasn't just a threat, it was an answer. An answer to the galaxy's questions about humanity's fate. Humanity was not lost. It had never been gone. It had simply been waiting. Kryx, still gripping the edge of the table, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the enormity of the ships. They were massive, impossibly vast. The scale alone made the Arvok ships look like toys. "What are they waiting for?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. He had always believed that humanity was gone. But now, staring at these ancient behemoths, his confidence faltered. Are they really from Earth?" Vekor asked, his voice small, almost afraid. Kryx hesitated, the words struggling to form in his mind. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The humans were supposed to be nothing but a distant memory, and yet the undeniable presence of these ships demanded an answer, one that he was terrified to hear. A sudden surge of power blasted through the command center as the rift in space expanded, allowing more ships to emerge. Their forms were not smooth or symmetrical like modern designs. Instead, they were jagged, almost monstrous, with intricate patterns carved into their surfaces. Each ship carried the weight of an ancient history, its design reflecting the mastery of a civilization that had long disappeared from the galactic stage. "They're not just ships," Kryx muttered. "They're artifacts." Vekor, still reeling, began, tapping commands into his console. The data streamed across the screen in a blur. This is impossible. There's no way this could be real." But it was real. More ships were emerging, and with each passing moment, the space around them seemed to ripple with the energy of their arrival. The sheer force of their presence was enough to warp the fabric of reality, causing the stars themselves to tremble. "What are they doing?" Vekor asked again, voice rising with panic. "We wait," Kryx said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "We wait for them to make their move." But no move came. The ships hung in space, still and silent, as if the very act of their existence was enough to send a message across the galaxy. And yet there was no sign of aggression, no indication of hostility. They simply existed, ancient, powerful, and waiting. A sudden pulse of light shot out from the center of one of the ships, piercing the darkness like a beam of pure energy. The light expanded, stretching across the galaxy, a sign of their presence to every corner of the universe. It was as if the very stars had aligned to herald the return of an ancient force. The Arvok were frozen, unsure of what to do next. They had never encountered anything like this, and yet deep down they all felt the same gnawing realization. They were not the dominant species in the galaxy. They were not the ones who would shape its future. Humanity had returned, And the galaxy would never be the same again. Kryx's mind raced as he processed the situation. Every instinct told him to prepare for war, but the ships showed no signs of aggression. They didn't fire, didn't make any move to harm. They simply stood there, looming over the galaxy, as if the very act of their presence was enough to signal their return. A low hum resonated from the depths of space, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones of every living being. It was the sound of something ancient awakening, a power that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to reassert itself. The Arvok leaders could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the change in the air. It was as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. But as much as they wanted to act, they knew they had no choice but to wait. They had no knowledge of the humans' plans, no understanding of what these ships represented. They only knew one thing for sure: the humans were not extinct, and they were coming. A sudden sharp ping echoed through the chamber as Vekor's screen flashed with new data. His eyes widened in disbelief. "They're not just ships," he said slowly. They're moving." Kryx turned sharply. "What do you mean? Moving how?" But before Vekor could answer, the entire command center was rocked by a violent tremor, shaking the very foundations of their ship. The monitors flickered, and the lights dimmed as the hum intensified, growing louder, more urgent. And then, without warning, the ships in the distance began to move. Slowly at first, like giants waking from a long slumber, they shifted in space, aligning in a formation that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Arvok fleet scrambled to respond, activating defensive systems and preparing for the worst, but no attack came. Instead, a message crackled through the communication channels, distorted but unmistakable. "This is Earth," the voice said, its tone low and resonant. "We are the legacy of the ancients, and we have returned." The words sent a ripple of terror through the Arvok. They had underestimated the humans. They had laughed at their silence, their perceived weakness. But now, the reality of their mistake was settling in, heavy and undeniable. The ships continued to move, slowly encircling the galaxy's edge, their presence a reminder of what had been lost and what was now returning. Kryx and Vekor exchanged a look, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. This wasn't just a fleet. This wasn't just a show of force. This was humanity's statement to the galaxy. They were back, and no one was ready for what came next. The silence that followed the message hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating any hopes of peace the Arvok may have had. Their ships, though formidable, seemed small against the sheer scale of the human fleet that had now surrounded the galaxy's edge. Each ship glinted in the faint light of distant stars, their designs old, worn by time, yet unbroken, a testament to the resilience of humanity's once mighty empire. "We should retreat," Vekor muttered, his voice barely audible. The words felt foreign to him, an admission of defeat he had never once thought he'd make. Retreat from humans, from a species they had once dismissed as weak, forgotten. Kryx, the Arvok strategist, stood frozen, staring at the holographic projection of the human fleet, his mind racing. It was impossible. There was no way these ships could still function. No way humanity could have hidden this power for so long. "They've been waiting," Kryx said, the words slipping from his mouth before he even realized their weight. He had felt it the moment he saw the ships. They hadn't come for glory or conquest. They had come for something far more profound, something far more dangerous: revenge. A low hum emanated from the control room, the same hum that had rattled the Arvok earlier, growing louder as the human fleet began to move in perfect unison. There was no haste in their movement, no rush. They were deliberate, calculating. Each ship moved with a precision that could only come from a species that had perfected the art of war, a species that had been forced into silence for far too long. Kryx's mind flashed back to the countless times his people had laughed at the rumors of humanity's lost fleets. the stories passed down by older races who had once feared the humans' power. Stories of massive warships, of fleets capable of turning the tide of any battle, all of it dismissed as myth. Now, standing on the precipice of a galaxy forever altered, Krylos realized the truth. The humans had never been lost. They had simply disappeared into the shadows, waiting for their moment to return. He watched as the ships formed an intricate pattern, one that sent a chill down his spine. They weren't just positioning themselves strategically, they were marking a boundary, a line in the sand that no one could cross. Earth had spoken, and now the rest of the galaxy would listen. A soft beep brought Krylos back to the present, and he turned to Vekor, who was frantically working to stabilize the communications feed. "What are they doing?" Vekor asked, his voice trembling. "Waiting," Krylos replied, his own voice uncertain. "Just like us." The human fleet halted, as if they had been frozen in time, their weapons and systems eerily still. For a moment, it felt like the universe had held its breath. The Arvok knew what was coming, but the waiting was worse than the fear. The silence was unbearable. Then the stars seemed to shift. Light flared from the center of the human fleet, a burst of energy so powerful it illuminated the darkest corners of space. The beam of light shot across the galaxy, streaking like a comet that had been forged in the heart of a dying star. The raw energy it exuded was unlike anything the Arvok had ever witnessed, pure, concentrated, and devastating. It cut through space like a hot knife through butter. "We have to respond," Vekor yelled, eyes wide with panic as the energy surged closer to their fleet. But Krylos was already moving. His hands slammed down on the control panel, activating the fleet's defensive shields. A shimmering barrier enveloped the Arvok ships, but Krylos knew it wouldn't be enough. No shield, no weapon, no countermeasure could hold against the power of humanity's return. The beam of energy crashed into the Arvok's defensive shield with a force that sent a ripple through space itself. The shields flared, crackling under the pressure, but they held. For a moment it seemed as though the Arvok had survived the worst of it. But the energy was relentless, pushing against the shield in a steady, inexorable wave. Krylos's heart pounded in his chest. The power of humanity's ships was unlike anything he had ever felt. The pulse of the beam seemed to match the beat of his own heart, a constant reminder of how small and insignificant his people had become. The Arvok fleet was nothing in comparison. He had always believed the galaxy belonged to his kind, that the stars were theirs to command. But in the presence of these ancient ships, he saw the truth. The galaxy had always belonged to humanity. As the beam continued to press against the shields, Krylos realized they weren't just fighting for their survival anymore. They were fighting for something much deeper, their very place in the universe. The human ships were not just sending a message of power, they were making a statement, and it wasn't one the Arvok were ready to hear. A sudden shockwave rattled through the command deck as the energy beam intensified. The shields flickered once, twice, then collapsed entirely, leaving the Arvok ships vulnerable. For a split second, Krylos saw the galaxies beyond, shimmering with the promise of destruction. The full force of humanity's technology was now upon them. All units, prepare to... Krylos's orders were cut off as a sudden explosion rocked the fleet. The communication channels went silent as systems failed, one by one. The human fleet hadn't attacked directly. Instead, they had cut through the heart of the Arvok's defenses with precision, using the sheer force of their presence to destabilize the very fabric of the fleet. And then, as the chaos unfolded, the message returned. The same voice, calm and unyielding, echoed once more across the galaxy. "This is Earth," it said, the weight of history in its words. "We are the legacy of the ancients, and we have returned." With that, the Arvok's fate was sealed. The Arvok fleet was broken. The vast ships, once symbols of their dominance, now floated in space like abandoned shells, their systems failing one by one. the once proud forces that had mocked humanity's silence now found themselves at the mercy of an ancient power they had never understood. The last of their defensive shields flickered and died, leaving them exposed, vulnerable and powerless. Krylos stood motionless in the command center, his eyes staring at the projection of the human fleet. It was no longer just an image on a screen. It was a presence, an undeniable force that had shifted the balance of the galaxy. The humanity they had laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated had returned, and with it came an overwhelming reminder of the past. The humans hadn't come to negotiate. They hadn't come to claim territory or engage in petty squabbles. No, they had come for something far deeper, something that went beyond the stars. The message had been clear from the beginning. They had returned to reclaim their legacy, to remind the galaxy of the power that had once been theirs, and to show that time had not weakened them. A low hum filled the command center as the last of the Arvok's ships struggled to maintain power. Vekor, standing beside Krylos, was visibly shaking. His fingers hovered above the console, but no command could change what was happening. The humans' ships were still, unmoving, but their presence was crushing. The sheer force of their quiet existence was enough to make the Arvok feel like insects underfoot. "They've already won," Vekor whispered, his voice thick with despair. We can't fight this." Krylos didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth hung in the air like a cold, unyielding fog. The galaxy was no longer theirs to command. The humans had returned, and their power was not just a relic of the past. It was a reminder that the galaxy would never forget what they were capable of. The silence was broken by the sudden flare of light from the human fleet. This time, it wasn't a weapon or a threat. It was an invitation to understand, to witness, and perhaps to submit. The light from their ships bathed the surrounding space in a soft, almost ethereal glow, as if the very essence of humanity was now washing over the galaxy. Krylos's thoughts raced. He had spent so much time believing that the Arvok were the rightful rulers of the stars, that their intelligence and strength had earned them the right to dominate. But now, faced with the silent power of humanity, he saw how fragile that belief was. The humans had never needed to dominate. They had simply needed to wait. And in that wait, they had become something far more powerful than any of the galaxy's empires. As the ships of the Arvok fleet drifted aimlessly, a final transmission flickered across their damaged screens. It wasn't a battle cry, nor a surrender. It was a single line sent across the vastness of space. "We are Earth," the voice of the human fleet echoed once more, "and we are not forgotten." The message was final. There was no anger, no arrogance, just an undeniable truth. The humans had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. Krylos turned to Vekor, his face pale. "What do we do now?" he asked, the words heavy with defeat. There was no military strategy left, no diplomatic solution. The Arvok had lost, and the humans had won. The question now was what the galaxy would look like in the aftermath. Would the Arvok bend to humanity's will? Would they be allowed to remain, or would they be driven into the forgotten corners of space, like so many others who had underestimated Earth? Vekor didn't respond at first. His mind was still racing, trying to come to terms with the reality of the situation. But then, slowly, he looked up at Krylos. "We survive," he said quietly. "We survive and we learn. There's nothing else left." Krylos nodded, his thoughts clouded by the enormity of their failure. He had always believed that the Arvok were destined to rule, but now he saw the truth. Power, dominance, and war were only fleeting. The true strength of the galaxy lay in the ability to endure, to persist, and to return when the time was right. The human fleet remained still, their ships now forming a perfect circle around the remnants of the Arvok. No weapons, no demands, just the cold, unyielding reminder that the past could never be erased. Humanity had returned, and in doing so, they had rewritten the history of the galaxy. And so, Krylos and Vekor watched as the stars shimmered around them, no longer just a map of conquest and control. The stars were now a canvas, waiting for humanity to paint their story across it once more. The galaxy had always belonged to them, and now it was theirs again. The Avok were not defeated by fire and fury, but by the silent, unstoppable force of time. And as the remnants of their fleet drifted into the dark, they could only wonder if they would ever truly understand what had happened, or if, perhaps, they had been merely the first of many species to realize that the past, once forgotten, could never be erased. The humans had returned, and they had shown the galaxy what true power looked like.